Good morning, everyone. I'll let you in and enter the room. So it's a great pleasure to have you all today to talk about climate action, local governments, carbon accounting, and mitigation strategies at local level. I am Antoine Gillod, coordinator of the Climate Chance Observatory. I remind you that this session is recorded. There won't be translation today, so this will all happen in English, but I'm sure that we will all have a good understanding of each other's, and please let us know in the chat if you have any question, if you want us to speak slower or to provide further details on some information. We are here to have a conversation up until 12:30, and I hope that we can finish this session with a lot of new knowledge about carbon accounting and piloting tools to drive mitigation strategies at local governments. Some of you are still entering, but I will introduce Climate Chance maybe to start. So Climate Chance is an association born in 2016 after a summit of non-state actors. It is dedicated to mobilize and support non-state actors in their diversity to implement climate action at local level, including local governments, companies, NGOs, and civil society movements. As part of the Climate Change Association is the Observatory of Climate Non-State Action, and our core activities is to provide analysis and showcase initiatives that are led by non-state actors that were implemented in the recent past and that proved successful in mitigating and adapting to climate change at all levels of governance. As part of our activities, we publish case studies, we publish reports, synthesis reports that are made to provide you with the global pictures of the year. And as part of this report is the one I'm about to lean on to drive this session today. It was published last April, and I will share with you PowerPoint just to introduce you to the publication so that you understand the context of this session. So, and I'd like to get the full screen. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so the main issue that we were dealing with in this global synthesis report on local climate action published in April was 6 years after COP21 and the Paris Agreement, what results on local climate action led by non-state actors and mostly local governments, including cities and regions. This report was organized around 4 sections. One was dealing with the progress made through international climate initiative, all those initiatives and networks that you know, ICLEI, the Covenant of Mayors, the Climate Group, and the 2 MOU, Regions for Regions. And I'm missing a lot of them. These global initiatives and their regional chapters as well. Then we dedicated a section to local governments' climate action in the times of the pandemic. So the purpose of this section was to provide concrete examples of climate actions implemented at local level in different sectors, including energy, transport, food security, buildings, and many others, just to provide with the best examples that we found through the years 2020 and 2021 to mitigate GHG emissions while providing territories with the security and the resiliency that they need to face climate change in the future. Third section was about multi-level climate governance and the integration of local governments. In this section, you can discover how 3 countries are organizing their climate action through the different level of governance, France, Germany, and Canada. This is a part of a side project of the observatory that aims to understand how do countries and all the subsidiary levels of governance are articulating to drive the transition on their territory. And the last section was about local governments, SDGs, and climate action to explore the links and the synergies that we can have between the SDGs, so Agenda 2030, and the Paris Agreement with the subsequent targets that were set for mitigating climate change. I would like today to focus on some aspects of this report that we insist on. The context is that more and more local governments are pledging carbon neutrality, and this has been a groundswell over the last 2 years among local governments, but also businesses. We have seen many companies pledging carbon neutrality on their own scope of action. While the carbon neutrality was first admitted as a concept by the IPCC at global level as the condition to reach, to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. So to date, according to figures from New Climate Institute, 929 local governments throughout the world have a net zero pledged, which represents 6.5 gigatons of CO2 of annual emissions and cover 880 million inhabitants. Among those cities, there are also 59 cities and regions that have achieved 100% renewable energy targets, which means that they are supplying their activities as local governments, as municipalities and regions with renewable energies, and 617 cities have committed to supply the municipal operations with 100% renewable energy. So we have a big movement, we have a big dynamic of pledges and commitments. And in this context, the question is how to keep track of the impacts of climate action on GNG emissions in the perspective to reach the global climate neutrality by the middle of the century. The question, the subsequent question is then, what are the tools that are in the hands of local governments to keep track, keep record of their GHG emissions, upstream and downstream of their climate action? Upstream means that how do they account the GHG emissions that their territory emits, which means that they have to find out the sources of the in the activities of that territory that are producing the most GHG emissions, so that they can find the best levers to mitigate their emissions. This requires a high accuracy of the accounting tools that are at their disposal, and we know that local governments sometimes strive to keep record year on year about their emissions. It requires a lot of technical methodologies, a lot of technical skills, and also political willingness to do it. So we have two main tools that are at the disposal at the moment: the emissions inventory, which is the statistical accounting tool that you all know, with the emissions factors, and the activity data that are combining to provide direct emissions accounting produced by the activities within the administrative or the geographical boundaries of a territory, which means that this emissions inventory is only framed around the administrative boundary of the local governments. It does not include, say, imported and exported emissions, which means that if you are consuming goods on your territory, you need to be able to assess and to understand what is the carbon impact that is behind. And as a city, you also sometimes produce some activities that have consequences for other territories, including producing waste, for instance, that can be treated in another territorial boundaries, which means that the emissions inventory is interesting to understand how are the emission structure for the municipalities, but it needs to be further detailed to have a bigger picture of how the territory is producing its emissions in the global context of trade and territorial exchanges. The carbon footprint is made for that. So it is used to aggregate direct emissions generated by the territory's production activities and indirect emissions induced by its production outside its own boundaries. So it means that we are endeavoring to taking account of these consumption activities through the accounting of emissions embodied in imports and life cycle assessments of products and services. It can be consumption-based. This is quite hard to implement, but carbon footprint is anyway a broader approach that aims to consider all these aspects that we talked about. So this is the upstream tools that are available to let the cities account their emissions and to understand where they come from. And then you need to, once you have set a strategy and develop plans to abate these emissions, you need to make sure that the local government has the proper tools to follow it and to year on year make sure that its investment, its public procurement, its regulations are driving the trends in the good way. So carbon budgets is an approach that is implemented, for instance, by Manchester City. The notion of carbon budget was found in IPCC Special Report on Climate Change in 2014, being defined as the cumulative amount of CO2 emissions permitted over a period of time to keep within a certain temperature threshold. This means that the authority, based on this concept, can plan the allocation of its mitigation effort throughout a period of time in order to make its contribution to limiting global warming to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees according to the target set by the Paris Agreement. Carbon budget in this perspective is more a tracking tool to set a benchmark to assess the government's efforts. It's not a legally binding obligation, so it does not mean that the government has to abide by its targets. There won't be sanctioned if it does not meet the targets. So this is an approach that is quite light for the local government to have the picture of how its mitigating strategy is being implemented. Sorry. So the climate budget in this context is a different approach, and Astrid Lenstad, who has joined us today as a speaker, will talk a little bit more about how it is implemented in Oslo. It is complementary to the carbon budget somehow. It does not cap ahead the long-term amount of emissions that the city must respect, but it serves as a blueprint to plan yearly transformative actions aligned with the city's emission targets within an upper limit of emissions. So it is in the context of Oslo voted as part of the financial budget, I think, and we will have further explanation about this approach later in the webinar. So let me introduce the speakers that have joined us today to explore these instruments and these local actions that have been implemented over the last years to improve carbon accounting and the piloting instruments to drive mitigation strategies. Thomas Lauvaux is a CNRS researcher scientist at the Laboratoire du Climat, the Laboratory of Climate Science, Environment and Climate Science at the Institut Pierre-Simon Laplace in France. Jouairyatou Wague is Climate Energy Project Officer at the Association Bilan Carbone. He will explain what is Association Bilan Carbone and how it works in building and implementing carbon accounting methodologies in France for local governments and even beyond. And Astrid Lenstad, as I said, is climate advisor for the climate agency of the city of Oslo and will provide us insights of how is the climate budget contributing to Oslo climate strategy. Thank you for all of those who have joined us. I will let the floor to our speakers, starting with Thomas. If you want to introduce your work you have worked over the last 2 years in different projects that are intended to provide complementary approaches to the statistical accounting methodologies that we've talked about before. These are quite innovative tools based on technologies, and you have implemented them in 2 cities as the piloting projects, the main projects that you are driving. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Okay, hey, thanks, Antoine. Yes, so happy to be here with you. Sorry, I'm really an academic in that room, and I want to show you what kind of information system we're thinking of and how they could help you. I'm really glad to be here because quite often we've been asked a question, what can you offer? And I actually don't know. That's a question for you. What questions should we address? And then I can try to figure out how we could do that with our tools. So I'm very happy to be in this room to discuss with all of you. What I want to show you today is really several projects. I try to sample more than 2 cities where we have done these kind of spatial information system. And I'm going to show you how it works. There are partners here. I try to cite people along the presentation, but okay. So I would just wanted to introduce something because I know a lot of you have spent an awful lot of time trying to figure out these carbon budget problems, and they're quite complex and they take a lot of efforts. However, at this stage, I would say that if I look across all the different tools we have been made available, we have wide disparities in the protocols. We can see different approaches, different standards, different emission factors. We sometimes get confused by the scopes, what we call direct or indirect, the community emission type, which is very convenient for a city, but very confusing in terms of tracking energy sources. Geographical boundaries, which is the nightmare of a scientist because they're completely insane. They make cuts in the middle of a city that has no limit, and the city extends way beyond the city boundaries, but that's not your governance model. So then you don't want to take care of the suburbs, for example. And then the data access, which I face every day, and you face it also in your work. This become a recurrent problem. A lot of cities don't have access to their own energy consumption or production data. The time lag has been also a recurring problem that more on the policymaker side we have faced. You have 2 to 3 years behind on average to get your latest carbon budget, which is terrible in terms of a political agenda. So this actually brought a lot of questions, and can we improve that and not wait 3 years before we get a number? Finally, on my end, I found the uncertainties to be really vague. There is a lack of actually accuracy and robustness. When people produce these numbers, they often lack a real thorough investigation on where are the missing pieces and how much do they impact the final result. So there has been significant progress, and I don't want to be all negative because in the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of agreements and consortium getting together, getting these protocols lined up and more refined. So I'm going to show you what we have done. And this is a typical product we have been using in the scientific community. It's different than the typical budget on an area. We try to grid them. We want spatial information because a lot of what we do require granularity. So time and space. I show you an example over the US. This is called the Vulcan project. It's a national scale inventory where people have used state reported activities, nation reported activities, and they try to map them down to a kilometer resolution. You can see here the different sectors. This is a lot of data. I think the final product is about 11 terabytes, so it would require a very nice computer to just be able to store it. We need that information because we think we need to understand the connections between cities on the energy grid, on the road transportation sectors, and we want to be able to also put a city within its context. For example, if you study the city of New York and next to it you have Philadelphia and Washington D.C., you can't really separate them. They're very connected and they share the same energy sources and behavior. So we're trying to put that in a more regional kind of understanding of how the energy and the carbon is actually emitted. When we compare these numbers, we crop them on the city limits and we compare them to the self-reported inventories. These are our findings. We found a systematic underestimation of about 30 to 35% for most of the cities. You can see for some of the cities, it's about 100%. For some, it's actually quite close. This gives you an idea of what we think are missing pieces in the self-reported inventories. We're not blaming the cities. We're just showing that this is the state of knowledge, actually the level of understanding you can have as a city of your own emissions because you're lacking industrial activity data, because the traffic model is not up to date, because the emission factors you were using or the company that you hired to do the self-reported inventory didn't use the latest tool available. So we have made that comparison also at the sectoral level. And this shows you the error bars associated with different sectors across all the cities. We have a self-reported inventory. It's about 50 in the US that we could get the documents and the numbers. You can see how the error bars are huge. So this mismatch I showed you on the map actually are hiding much larger discrepancies at the sectoral level. Sometimes the electricity production was not reported. Sometimes the domestic fuel was not reported. The traffic sectors were vastly underestimated. Sometimes the arbor, like some pieces of the city were removed, like the airport, the shipping, they were just missing completely because they are not within the jurisdiction of the city itself. So they simply removed it. So all these different gaps and disagreements across methods made us show that it's very hard to actually have a robust and potentially trackable that you can monitor over the years, because big pieces of the puzzles are missing. Okay, so how can we help with that? Exactly like you could imagine that you do the air quality monitoring problem, you have monitoring stations in your city. We're going to try to do the same thing, but for CO2. So we start with that resolved inventories. And to be clear here, I'm talking about direct emissions only, which for some of you may think it's a small fraction of the whole problem. It's very true. It's about 25% maybe of the total emissions. But that's the one you can actually track on your territory and control potentially. So we started there as a first step for that problem. You couple these emissions to an atmospheric model, exactly the same tools you see for the weather forecast every day. We create the plume of the city, and we can compare these to our observations. We deploy towers, we deploy instruments, sorry, on communication towers, building tops, we can also have column measurements. I'm not going to go too far, but this is the typical network we can deploy over a city. Okay, to give you a little more of, it's way more complex than I want to say today, but there are a lot of pieces in there where you have your city, where the city starts, where the city ends. We technically measure, it's a very simple thing. You measure when the wind comes through your city, you measure the air before your city, and you measure the air after your city. The gradient you're measuring between these 2 points is technically all the CO2 that has been released by the city over a period of time. So you could imagine deploying these sites or coming with an aircraft and sampling around the city to actually get some measurements of that. Okay, this is an example of Indianapolis, over Indianapolis, a typical Midwest city, very spread, wide suburbs with residential areas sprawling across the land. The city proper of Indianapolis is actually a small chunk of the whole metropolitan area. And we're surrounded by corn and soybean all around the area with major highways crossing the city. We deployed 12 towers across that town. And we divided the problem into 2 sectors. One is, let's say, a traffic sector. You can see a map of it here with the beltway around Indianapolis. And here is more of a residential commercial sector where we have static sources. And you can see how it's distributed with a small downtown and a very extensive suburb around the city. You can see here over 3 years what the traffic sector looks like, and no seasonality because Americans drive whatever happens, about the same pace. Now below that, you can see the residential sector and the commercial center. You can see the winter time with an increase in emissions. You can see the summertime when people turn on their air conditioning systems. So you can see a dual seasonality over 3 years. We try to do it also spatially. You can see the map, and this is what the atmospheric system is also going to tell you. This area is too low, this area is too high. We can see attribution problem, which goes back to the sectoral attribution. If you have underestimated your traffic and overestimated your industries, you're going to see these areas being actually noticed by the system. When you take these numbers and you compare it to the official inventory of the city of Indianapolis, coming from the Thrive report, this is the self-reported SRI I put here, we found a systematic mismatch of 35% over a period of six to 7 years. So 3 different numbers estimated. We have identified what was missing. Domestic fuel was missing, some industries were missing. We were missing also on the traffic emissions. They were highly underestimated. And this big decrease that you see is a switch from coal to natural gas in the local power plant. So we have identified that clearly we could totally miss on a lot of the activities. So when they build their climate action plan, based on that self-reported inventories, already missing 40% of the sources. This is equivalent to the entire traffic emissions of the city. So there is also a mismatch that we deeply worry about, because if you build your climate action plan on that, you might completely underestimate the actual reduction that, or overestimate the reduction you intend. So for a net zero pledge, for example, you have 40% more emissions to remove before you can actually claim a net zero at the city level. I want to show you also the real time, because this is a strong component of the problem. A lot of the policy decisions are made on long time scales, and sometimes at the local government, it means you have a different term. Your mayor is gone. That's a big problem. You start a policy, you implement the change, and you never see the impact of it. So we have used the lockdown, and maybe there is a good side of COVID. This is a small one, but this is one. We have tracked the change in behavior. People have suddenly stopped taking their car. And this is the city of Paris, where there was a massive, very strict lockdown in the period of March to May of 2020. You can see the 3 years and how the emissions dropped over these 3 months. Here you can see for the different component, the building sector, the traffic sector, and all the other sectors, how it impacted the carbon emissions over that period. We had numbers. The official inventory is not even there. They just released the 2018 update, so we're not going to get a 2020 estimate. But we try to do it with a network of towers. You see here 7 towers across the city. That were confirmed also on the behavioral aspect. You see days of the week here. You see from Monday to Sunday how the typical week looks like in Paris versus the week during the lockdown. So it also shows you that in the weekend, for example, you might have less of a decrease than during the week. People still had to go shopping, but they don't go to work on a regular weekday. So it shows you also that the change in your emissions might happen on specific days of the week. How can you regulate your policies based on that? We can inform on that as well. The decrease was about 40% compared to the previous year. It's a massive decrease, right? 40% is massive. But when you think of Paris being completely locked down and actually no activity, and you still have 60% of the typical emission of the city, it shows you that there is, just as a baseline emission, even if you don't touch your car, a massive amount of CO2 that has been released by the city, just to keep the city going on. So it made us think of the deeper problem, that you cannot just not take your car and solve the problem. It's actually a little more complicated than that. I want to show you a similar example that I've been done in the city of Baltimore. You see here the line of the city of Baltimore within the DC Baltimore metropolitan area. You see how the city proper is a small chunk of that gigantic metropolitan area. You see here a division by zip code, and you can see how the emissions vary a lot depending on the area you were targeting. You need very high granularity to see the specificity of the emissions. Anyway, they calculated a 31% reduction over the month of April during the lockdown period over the US, using about the same strategy. So again, we're in the same ballpark, showing how we can rapidly show some estimates of emissions. And just to show you another project that we we started with Michel Ramonet and people from Mexico, University of Mexico, UNAM. We have deployed sites across the city of Mexico, the basin of Mexico, even a larger area there. We're trying to connect it with the air quality network. And it shows you measuring from the mountain top around Mexico City, how we get our background, the clean air around Mexico, and we compare it to the downtown sites that we have deployed at the city of Mexico, at the University of Mexico, and in downtown area. You see how the two over time shows us the peaks in the city of Mexico versus the background. You still see a trend, right? Because CO2 is increasing worldwide. So it's not because of Mexico City. But by looking at the gradient between the two sites, we intend to keep track of emissions in the city of Mexico as well. Okay, and just to give you an idea, because these are not isolated examples, we're trying to get as many countries and labs and deployment as everywhere, because every city is different, especially in terms of behaviors, energy sources, etc. So every time it's a new challenge. I show you here example of the cities we're deploying. They are deployed actually and measuring. There were more short-term experiments in Cape Town. New Zealand is starting a program. So all these cities have actually data that we could use to actually try to answer some of the questions of the city and the local governments. I'm going to stop there and let the floor next speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, for this very informative presentations of highly complex subject for anyone who's not used to this universe of atmospheric measurement of carbon emissions. We will have the opportunity to exchange right after all the presentations. If you have any questions, please make use of the chat box or the question and answer tool that is in your toolbar at the bottom of your screen. And now I will turn towards Jouairyatou Wague from the Association Bilan Carbone.
Thank you, Antoine.
Welcome.
Share my screen. It's okay?
Yeah, it's okay. So please remind us what is the Association Bilan Carbone and how you're working in France about carbon accounting methodologies and the projects that you're driving at local level right now. So
I will start with a few slides to introduce quickly ABC and our activities, and then I will go through the core of the subject, which is carbon footprints, but also the mitigation actions, because it's the aim to reach the carbon neutrality. And I will make a focus on the ClickSon project, which is a way to calculate carbon footprint for secondary schools. So ABC, which means Association of Bilan Carbone in French. So ABC was created 10 years ago to develop and to disseminate the Bilan Carbone method for GHG emissions accounting and reductions. And ABC's purpose is to facilitate the energy and climate transition for organizations at French, but also at international level. For that, we are developing methods related to GHG emissions from accounting to mitigation phase. And we promote synergies between organizations, and we support also the international dissemination of the French expertise on the matter. We participate on research projects to bring together skills, expertise, and also to give access to carbon news information, to raise awareness, to learn on carbon subjects. And we're targeting companies, but also public sectors, local authorities, universities, consulting firms, and educational scale. ABC expands its activities to impact more public, working with various organizations, but also with the aim to improve the low carbon strategy and to facilitate the energy and climate transition. What else? We also participate in many projects about climate change awareness. For example, we have contributed to the Life Clean Food project, aiming at spreading the carbon footprint evaluation expertise to other countries in Europe. In the consortium, there were Greece, Italy, Hungary, and Croatia. And we developed a calculation tool for the project to allow the voluntary organizations to calculate their carbon footprint and also to implement an online platform that serves as common basis for carbon accountability and low carbon transition in Europe. So as you understand, we are really specialized on the tools and the methodology for carbon accounting. Our tool is also called the Bilan Carbone, like the name of the associations. And the aim of the carbon footprint is to firstly calculate the carbon footprint of the organization, and then to define a mitigation action plan to reduce GHG emissions regarding the main costs identified with the profile. There is several steps to undertake to implement a carbon footprint project. Bilan Carbone is designed for the calculation of human GHG emissions, and it's a methodology going beyond 2 parts with several steps. And the first is to define the scope, and the idea is to taking into account all the GHG as possible regarding the emission factors. We talk about little with the data activity too. And regarding the emission which will be considered, we have direct emission on site, but also the indirect, which are produced upstream and downstream. And this is a way to define the scopes and to taking into account as much as possible scope 3, donc, which is the upstream and downstream, because this part represents 70 to 99% of the organization's carbon footprint. Of course, the idea is to justify and document all the elements you will use in the tools to have a justification for the data, for the emission factors, and also to find a continual improvement regarding the data collection, because it is the most consuming part of the project. And in this part, you will have to collect data with the internal data owners, but also and mostly with external data owners like suppliers, clients, and partners. And it's not a little project on the organization. It will be included on the strategy, and that's why it's a collaborative work in which you will include all the organizations. Firstly, to raising the awareness about the climate change and about the impact on your activity too. So the Bilan Carbone, what is the Bilan Carbone? Firstly, it is a method, and secondly, it is also a tool. And we have a tool which is historically on a spreadsheet format. But now we have switching from spreadsheet to a software version with the idea of using the tool for the mitigation phase, because most of the time when organizations think about carbon footprints, it's also for a reporting goal. But we have to keep in mind that it's not the final goal. The real goal is to reduce the actions. And for that, we have to analyze the result of the carbon footprint produced through the Bilan Carbone and to define an action plan. So that's why we think about a new version of the tool. And in this new version, you will find, of course, all the functionalities which were present on the spreadsheet, but we have the opportunity to define new functionalities like the data traceability, a better way to prepare the data collections with the management process, to improve the collaborative work, because you can do several to connect to the same account, to check the data, to complete the data, to follow the actions, compared to a one spreadsheet that you have to send by email, which is not really a low carbon way, including also a distance calculator for the commuting and all the posts which could be included in this part. And you have also additional spreadsheets regarding industries, for example, to taking into account refrigerant and cooling gases, to keep in the mind the way to take into account all GHG and not removing some emissions. So the idea is to analyze your the carbon footprint to find solutions, and it is a real the most I think the most step, the most important step of the project, and we have to allocate some resources, materials, and time to go through the objective. And for this step, also you have to include several stakeholders, not only the internal the internal person of the organizations, because you have for some action, it's not only on your way. You have to find a way with your suppliers, your clients, to taking into account their reality to improve the process. So how can we define an actions? The process is well known, and you have a main principle to follow. Firstly, it's to engage a co-building approach with interested parts, so I have also said that. And also to identify the possible action. In this part, you should have the innovative approach and not to limit also on the most quick action, what is possible. You will have three kinds of action. The first one is called the quick wins, because it's all actions that keep in mind easily and that is easy to put in place. But most of the time, it's not really significant regarding the GHG reduction impact. You have also priority action, and this action will target the most important GHG emission sources regarding your carbon footprint profile. But it also requires most of the time investments. That's why when you are on the way to implement a strategy for low carbon transition, for sure you should have investment and other resources to reach your goal. And generally, it should be more long, but you will have a real GHG reduction impact. And finally, and the most, I think, hard action, it's the strategic action, which need time to be implemented and which consider all the business models. And for example, for regarding the leakage of fossil fuels, or the reality of your organization, which is if your organization could be existing in 2050 in a carbon neutral world, and this is really the way to assess your strategy and to reduce as much as possible your GHG emissions. So to define an action plan, we know that you have to quantify the action to see regarding your sectoral activity, if you are online, or if you have to do more endeavors. You have also to define a calendar and resources to manage the implementation of the action plan. We know that some actions are easy to implement and other require more resources. And the aim of our software now is really to improve the following part and the monitoring of the action defined through the regarding your Bilan Carbone on your carbon footprint. So the idea of the carbon accounting to go to the mitigation action is really to work with your results. That is why it is compatible with human activities accounting to collect data, even if it is not easy. And it's on the single way to have a good perception of your activity regarding carbon footprints and impact on environment. But you should be careful with the ready-to-use solution because we can't have the same solution for different sector of activities. So you have to adapt and to be innovative regarding your sectoral activities. It's also a way to propose solution, but you have to be coherent with the result and with the global objective regarding city objective, national objective, but also carbon neutrality in 2050. I also said that it's a way to be creative and to find about new business models, but also it's impossible to change. And we know that for some changing, you need to have external constraints like regulation, new taxes, and so on. But anyway, you should and you must go through the low carbon world. And finally, we have a great focus on organizations and maybe on cities, but it's also important to think about other sectors like education. So now I will go through the ClickSun project. Maybe do you remember about the youth movements for climate? And in the 2019 Youth Climate Streak have started with an increasing number of demonstrators, including school children in more than 200 countries, not only in Europe, but across the world, in Australia, Japan, Canada, and United States. Youth is engaged towards the fight against global warming and protest against inaction on climate change. They were not alone, as scientists had given them their support, signing an open letter, for example, as well as politician members. As the Minister of Education of Belgium has said, we shouldn't discourage students from protesting, and she highlighted the main to provide people with the knowledge and to equip them with the appropriate tool dealing with climate. And for that, the way is to adopt an innovative approach through classrooms program and involving more schools as actors on the fight against climate change. And for that, we have think and designed the Clixon project, which was submitted in European Commission in September 2020. Clixon means Climate Change Educational Kit for Pedagogic Innovation in Secondary Schools. Too long, that's why we use the acronym Clixon. So the Clixon project focuses on some specific target group in secondary schools that are the students, the teachers, but also the administrative non-educational staff and the school leaders too. ABC and Avenir Climatique and other French associations are offering energy and climate change awareness training program content and a dedicated methodology and tool to allow organizations, so schools, to account for all their GHG emissions and thus become aware of their main emission sources and energy vulnerability. We have several partners on the project, Designed for Change in Spain, Amicucci and Università Politecnica della Marche in Italy. And also a school which is Jesuinitas in Italy, in Spain, sorry. And all these actors are particularly active within the framework of the knowledge and digital education to find the proper way to raising awareness of children. So the main project output will be a climate change educational toolkit, which will be available in 4 languages, French, Spanish, Italian, and of course in English, because it's a European project. And this kit will allow to support students from secondary school to launch the initiative, to change behavior, and to contribute to the low carbon transition of their establishments. The initiative will entail the calculation of the carbon footprint of the establishment by students themselves that can be based on the main emissive activities or on complete activities. And also on the definition and the implementation of mitigation action plans. That's why we need to have school leaders to be able to allocate some resources to reach the goal and to reduce the carbon footprint. It's based on a common innovative pedagogical approach, and the toolkit will be designed during the project. We have just started the project at the beginning of the year, so all most of the development are in progress, but we should have the first deliverables in for September, like the website and the digital calculator. We have also a facilitator package for teachers and for administrative non-educational staff, which will help students and facilitate the implementation of the initiative, and a student kit that will provide students with the necessary tools to launch the initiative with teaching content, digital calculators, a guideline for defining and implementing mitigation action plan, as well as a gamification model to follow the progresses. The toolkit will be completed by the creation of a website to propose the technical content and maybe also an online community for the users to support and further replication, to have a testimony and exchanges between children in different countries and the use of the toolkit. The project will last 3 years. The first year will entail the development and the test of the facilitator package by teachers, and the first round of experiments of the student testing on the side of the student kit, and finally an experimentation during the second year with where teachers, students, administrative, non-educational, and will be more autonomous, and we can go deeper into the initiative. And in the final year, we will allow the compilation of the climate change educational toolkit and large replication of the initiatives in the school associated and in new countries. So regarding Paris Agreement, we are now in 2021. We know that all climate celebrations should be an opportunity to assess our progress, but also to evaluate the objective to realize and to reach the carbon neutrality in 2050. But at our scale, we find that it is really important to work at different scales, at city level, with companies level, with municipalities, with other local authorities to amplify the actions. And for all sectors, we really need innovation and thinking out of the box without limiting the health.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Jouairyatou. And I'm sure that we'll need to follow up the progress of this European project that you've just introduced. And as you said, it's just at the beginning. And I'm sure that we can come back to you later in the session to let the audience know of how they can reach the Association Bilan Carbone if they're based in Europe or in Africa, as I know that many of our audience are coming from the African continent. Maybe you can get in touch and share your knowledge about like carbon accounting and educational projects as you are driving right now. Astrid Lenstad, you're coming from the city of Oslo, working for the climate agency, and Oslo has stood up among its peers in Europe with the climate budget. The climate budget, as I introduced it at the beginning of the session, is quite an innovative tool that, to my knowledge, is not so used across the continent. And we try to describe it a bit in the global synthesis reports, as well as in a case study dedicated to the transport sector in Norway 2 years ago. Could you come back to the sources of how the city of Oslo came with this idea and how it is useful for a city to merge its climate targets with the yearly budgets, voting, and all the mainstreaming climate objectives in the global policy of the municipality?
Yes, thank you. Do you hear me, and do you see my slides in like full screen?
Very well, couldn't be better.
Perfect. So first, I want to thank you for inviting me to this event, and I'm glad to be here. And I also want to thank you for the last presentations. This is really interesting tools that we should have in mind when we are developing the climate work in Oslo too. So thank you so much. And then I want to tell you about, or present for you, something that I am really excited about and something that Oslo is quite proud of, the climate budgets. We have implemented, Oslo has implemented one of, I don't know, the most ambitious climate targets of any capital in this world. We believe that the emissions reduction should be taken in place in Oslo, not by someone else, but that we should do it. So we have, and our goals are in line with the Paris Agreement. So by 2030, the goal is to reduce the direct emissions of greenhouse gases by 95%. And in other words, Oslo will be a zero emission city by 2030. And then, nevertheless, even if Oslo reaches its zero emission goal, the climate will continue to change due to the amount of CO2 already in the atmosphere, and also because the climate change is a global phenomenon. And therefore, we need to adapt to present and future hazards. And therefore, we have a target in Oslo that Oslo is also to become a climate resilient city. So this is the targets, the climate goals of Oslo. And let's see. And I'm sorry. One of the key challenges for reaching the Paris Agreement is the fragmentation of responsibilities between global, national, and local level. And in addition, there are often internal division between administrations, between those who think money and those who think about emissions. So in Oslo, we have taken measures to avoid this fragmentation with introducing the climate budget. And with the climate budget, we seek to count carbon the way we count money. And just like the financial budget, the climate budget is the responsibility of the deputy mayor up for finance in Oslo. But of course, with the solid technical support from the climate expertise in the environmental sector. And with that said, I want to emphasize the importance of capacities and institutions. Solving the climate challenge requires new skill sets in public administration. We cannot expect to deal efficiently with these issues without adjusting our organization. And therefore, in Oslo, we have established the climate agency where I work. And the agency is set up to provide technical support and policy advice on climate measures to the city government and to all other city agencies. We are also collaborating with the private sector, research institutions, and NGOs around climate work and measures in Oslo. So then I want to present for you the climate strategy of Oslo. We developed a new climate strategy towards 2030 last year, and it was adopted by the City Council last spring in 2020. This strategy gives further direction to our work towards our climate goal. And the strategy contains a broader range of climate change related activities. This includes indirect emissions taking place outside of the city boundaries and climate effects of land use changes, not only direct emissions. So the climate strategy states that Oslo will reduce climate emissions with 95% by 2030 compared to 2009. It will increase natural capture of CO2, reduce total energy consumption, and strengthen the city's climate resilience. And also, reduce the city's climate footprint and develop and implement climate governance. And the last one is important, and I will come back to you about what we mean about climate governance. So yes, what is the climate budget? The climate budget is the key tool to organize our climate work in Oslo, and it is a tool to operationalize our climate goals and the climate strategy on an annual basis. So as far as we know, Oslo was the first city in the world to introduce climate budgets, and we had it for the first time in 2017. And now we are developing our 6th budget for 2022. And the climate budget is fully integrated in the financial budget process. And that is important because this is the most important tool in the governance system. We are budgeting towards the future by identifying the measures and instruments needed to reach our targets. And the emission impact of each measure is, we try to estimate them, and the responsible unit for the implementation is identified. The budget clearly states that what has to be done and who is going to do it and when should a measure be finished and what is the cost. I want to emphasize that the climate budget can be developed in many forms. This is pioneering work. And in Oslo, we are continuously working to improve the methodology as we gain more experience and knowledge. And as Thomas emphasized, the data access and uncertainties are really high around climate emission sources and around the data, and also around the inventory. And so we try to be transparent and also around the chosen boundaries and the uncertainties around the inventory and the calculated measures. Then I have to switch screen there. So what does the budget contains in Oslo? The first step in developing a climate budget is to define the system boundaries. And there are many ways to do this. The budget can, for example, be developed for the city administration and the emissions the city administration is emitting, or the city as a geographical unit. And it all depends on what data you have available, the knowledge you have available, and the resources you have available. And as I said, the strategy and the measures address all the scopes from 1 to 3 in Oslo. And we are working on reducing both our direct and indirect emissions and the entire footprint. But with that said, it's important to keep them separate. And therefore, the climate budget, in the climate budget, we're only focusing on the direct emissions, like scope 1. So the Oslo climate budget covers emissions from the city of Oslo as a geographical area. It includes all emissions sectors available statistics, and it contains a combination of national, regional, and local measures, and a combination of quantified and also non-quantified measures. Yes. So before you develop a climate budget, you have to know the historical greenhouse gas emissions. And here you can see the greenhouse gas inventory for Oslo developed by the Norwegian Environment Agency, like the state. They develop statistics for all municipalities in Norway with the same methodology as the greenhouse gas inventory by the IPCC guidelines. And it contains 9 emission sectors and 38 emission sources. And when you know the historical data, then you can set up a climate budget. So this is the framework for Oslo's climate budget in 2021. And the green line shows the inventory, and the green dotted line shows a projection of emissions in Oslo. And the red dots are our climate goals, and the yellow line shows our annual target. The projection very clearly demonstrates that we, with business as usual, it will not lead to our ambitious targets. So more actions are needed, and therefore we are developing measures and implementing them into the climate work and the budget. So for each annual budget, the measures are analyzed towards a target year. And the methodology differs depending on available data, knowledge of the measures, and also development in the sector. It is important to keep in mind that not all measures can be quantified, and the effects cannot always be isolated to one measure or instrument. The toolbox for mitigation action is a mixture of national, regional, and local instruments. And we try to present all the measures with quantified, the quantified measures, and present them as a number. And then we will have this this climate budget. So here is the climate budget for 2021. And the light green dotted line shows the result of all the measures when we have aggregated all the calculated measures. And as you can see, we will achieve a reduction in emissions of 30% by 2023. So we still have a way to go to reach our target of 52%. Yeah, we see this as a really good tool to present for our politicians that more actions are needed. And we are using this budget to present it and be transparent to all the inhabitants in Oslo. Let's see. So just I want to tell you how we can develop a climate budget. And in Oslo, we have a governance structure like this. I will not go into this, but the climate budget is managed by this city finance department in close cooperation with the environment and transport department. And the climate agency is lying under the Department of Environment and Transport. However, all departments are encouraged to propose measures in the budget and to be responsible entities for implementation. And the climate agency provide expert advice on the climate budget. We are actually making the budget, but the Department of Finance is owning it. And we also provide advice and knowledge when it comes to implementing and also reporting on the measures in the climate budget, like indicators and when you should report and how often. And as I said, the climate budget is fully integrated into the financial budget and also the budget process. This is the budgeting cycle in Oslo. The climate budget is published and decided upon as an integral part of the annual budget. And the same budget logic applies to the climate budget as to the financial budget. You cannot decide to use more than you have available. What makes the climate budget an efficient governance system is that the units that are responsible for the measures have to report on result indicators 3 times a year. It's the same reporting system as the financial budget. In that way, we can follow up all the measures and adjust the course if we see that some measures or instruments don't deliver the assumed emission reduction. So as the official emission statistics for Oslo, the inventory, are published with 1.5 year delay, we have also developed the climate barometer to track trends. It is a collection of indicators on the development in activity within the different sectors. The indicators are tracking the measures and instruments, for example, through examining vehicles passing through the toll ring and the rate of transition towards private and commercial electrical vehicles. we also update the indicators 3 times a year and publish them through our website. Yeah, so I think I will go to, yeah, and also before I go to my concluding remarks, I want to tell you about this guideline on how to develop a climate budget. We published this guideline in January 2021. It is a project, 2-year project, where we were 3 cities who already had developed a climate budget, who were guiding 6 cities and regions developing climate budgets. And then we used experience from this project to develop a guide for all the other cities in Norway. So this guide is a report and also a website, and probably we will have it in English soon.
Do you know when?
No, I don't know, but we have this C40 project on climate budget, a pilot where they are going to share experiences on climate budgeting, and they wanted this guide to be in English, so we will probably translate it in this autumn, but I'm not sure yet.
I think that's a good news for all those who follow us today, because there has been some remarks about stakeholders cooperations, and including John Kaganga from Uganda. He was stressing that there is a gap between some developed and developing countries that need to be filled. And this type of initiatives helps a lot, I think, to understand how the governance in the city can set this type of tools. Yeah, we should definitely translate it to English so everyone can see how we are developing climate budget. And also there is, you cannot use all this, you can not adopt the way we do it, but probably take some experience and lessons learned from us and do it and develop it in the way that it fits your city. That's exactly what Jouairyatou stressed. Also, there is no ready-to-use or one-size-fits-all solution. But so in this context, we need cooperation between actors. That's why we're here, gathering all these people around and trying to build networks also. So please feel free to share your emails and try to get in touch with each other if you're interested into maybe getting insight on more information on how to implement, follow, or join the projects that were introduced today. Astrid, is there something else that you want to show us about the climate budget? No, I have some lessons learned and concluding remarks in the end. As Thomas emphasized, there is always uncertainties around the inventories and the data. So we have to continuously work to further develop the technical side of the climate budget. It's important not to be accused of cheating with the numbers. So therefore we see the transparency as the key. And we also find communication efforts valuable in the climate budget work. We collaborate within the city administration and also with other cities and municipalities, and we find this to give added value in the climate work, in the climate budget work. And we also experience that as long as we are transparent, climate politics can be directed through the climate budget. We do not have all the answers, but with the climate budget, we are able to give advice to our decision makers with greater certainties. And also I have some concluding remarks here on the slide, so you can just read. And with that said, I think I will just finish my presentation with this picture of Oslo.
this was before Corona, but soon, yeah, the city will look like this again, I think.
So you're inviting us to join you for the summer in
Yes,
Oslo.
I am inviting you for the summer in Oslo.
Okay, cool. I think we'll consider this option for our next holidays. And talking about coronavirus, we have a question from Sonia Enrique, who is asking if you have observed some form of urban exode movement in Oslo in the aftermath of the pandemic. Has there been changed in the way people are living their lives in the city or outside the city?
Yes, of course. We see that people are moving and with bikes, and they are walking more. So the traffic is lower, and we also see that the city center is quite silent. But now Oslo is reopening, so now it's exploding in the city center, and we are not sure how the corona or the pandemic will define the public transport in time. Right now, there are less people on the buses and the trams, but in 1 year, I don't know. So this is something we are trying to map right now and research, but we don't have any concluding points on this right now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this answer. And I'm trying to look in the chat if there's, yeah, the question, yeah, actually, because I think that the purpose of the question was that in France, you know, we're kind of seeing people leaving the city to go into the countryside, but maybe, you know, the structure of urbanization is different in Norway. So is there people moving out to countryside from Oslo, which could change the perspective on GHG emissions as well?
The population growth in Oslo is less this year than in previously years, but I don't think it will be something that will continue. So it's still population growth in Oslo, but yeah, we hear about people moving out to the countryside and wanting to be more in the mountains because Oslo is so silent. But I think soon when it's reopened, we don't see this the trend developing further.
Okay, thank you. And what about, we talked a little bit about data access uncertainty, and you proved with the climate budget of Oslo that this is not just a matter of communication, this is also a matter of transparency, and that although you have fixed very ambitious targets, Oslo is for now out of track, but still in progress. So, and you don't hide it. How can you improve the way that you collect data and make sure that you have a good data access to do the tracking of your emissions? As you said about Thomas presentations, which has introduced a tool that is meant to be complementary to the traditional GHG emissions accounting methodologies.
Actually, we have this ongoing project with the climate, the environmental department agency, the state agency, which are developing the inventories, how to develop this and make it better. And as you said, we are trying to track the emissions with indicators, and that's mostly because the inventory is there. published 1.5 years delayed. So we have to track the emissions between when the inventory is published and now. So that's why. But of course, the inventory should be more accurate, and we do have this ongoing project trying to develop it and be better.
And I think my colleague Samuel has a question for Thomas regarding how the tools can be implemented in the cities.
Yeah, thank you very much, Antoine. Thank you, Thomas.
Sorry, I will just.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas, for your very interesting presentation. Yeah, my question was about, no, I had a first question. It's more about curiosity, because I'd be glad to know more about the methodology used to track the origin of the emissions of the cities. And the second question is linked, but broader, and I assume all of this requires an expertise in, I don't know, servers for calculation, depending on the models, the type of models you use. So my question was about the ability of the cities to implement these tools. Is these tools like dependent from a scientific team and scientific knowledge, or is it possible for a city to implement it alone?
Yeah, very good question. Okay. So, okay, on the, and just to make it clear, these atmospheric systems always start with an inventory. We cannot get away from it. And the final product, I think, to me, is the inventory. So the goal of all these things, we're not trying, for example, to find out, we can sometimes see if we missed a point source, if we missed an industry, or if something was not reported correctly. But we are more there to identify in which areas we see a problem. Then we go back to the inventory and we try to fix it. So the final goal is really to provide the most accurate inventory possible for the city decision makers. So in the implementation, it has been a big problem because, first of all, the technology, the instruments are very expensive. When I started the field, it cost about 50,000 euros for a single instrument. So when you have to deploy a network of 15, it's just absolutely out of control for a city budget. We're working now on these low cost and mid cost technologies. So we're really pushing the field so that we can reduce the instrumentation cost, and then the cities can operate their own networks. The best way I've seen for the implementation is to work with the air quality agencies. Many cities have already an air quality agency dealing with sites, instrumentation, and making forecasts on their air quality. CO2 is a little different because we're not trying to look at the peaks and the extreme events of air pollution. We're more trying to do a calculation on the long term. So it's a little different, the way you structure the network and the way you calculate it. But it's very similar. So we try to build up around the expertise of the air quality agencies, pass on how to do a CO2 monitoring system. And then, so we work with Air Paris, for example, in Paris. I try to work with cities in the US, with CARB, for example, in California, the Air Resource Board, that are dealing with all the air pollution events. We also try to go with private sectors. So we work right now with Suez, for example. They have a branch company. We pass on the technology to them, and they can try to connect with cities and sell it as a service, as a product to a city. We also have satellite. We have a lot of hope in satellite monitoring. For a lot of cities who don't have the resources to deploy a network, we hope that the future satellite missions will be able to provide information to that. I've been working over Lahore in Pakistan. We tried to look at the trend in emissions over Pakistan. To me, there is also a key role of developing nations, because I mean, Europe is trying to decrease as the US, but the key for the future is really these really fast, rapidly growing cities that we have seen in Nigeria, we see in Pakistan, we see Jakarta. These cities are going to be the keys in 20 years from now, because if they right now do a business as usual development, in 20 years from now we're going to have to backtrack and try to reduce these emissions. If we act now and can help them track their emissions and do better now, it will avoid huge costs in the future to try to remove these emissions from the atmosphere. So I would love to get these low cost to mid cost sensors in fast growing cities and help them monitor their emissions as it is happening now. It's still difficult. We need more technology and more investment from nations to get these instruments cheaper and cheaper, more affordable. The expertise is there. We also go through the United Nations, and I want to emphasize that we have a group at the World Meteorological Organization that is really intended to deploy these technologies in other countries, trying to bring the expertise to them. So through that group, and I could pass on information for that group, you can reach out and ask United Nations to help for the development of these systems. The expertise is coming. We're still lacking a lot of workforces. I mean, that's obvious. But I think with air quality, United Nations development funds, and trying to target these very fast-growing cities, we can reach out before it's too late. And I was very impressed by Oslo, to be honest, to say that we have objectives and here are the cuts. There is a big confusion. Most cities I've talked to will always show you their objectives and not their actual decrease. And I was pretty impressed by that because I think it's a very honest assessment of what they're trying to do and achieve and what they can do. So this kind of approaches would bring confidence to the world that you have done your emission cuts. You have achieved that. It will give also confidence to me to investment funds. I think investors are looking for green cities, but they want to be able to track these emissions. They don't just want the report to say, we think we have achieved that. They want to prove that it's actually there. So we hope these tools could also be funded by green investment funds to say, these are actual emission cuts. They are not theoretical good wishes, they are actually realities. So I think through these mechanisms, we can really reach out to places where it really matters for the global climate change objectives we have fixed on the Paris Agreement. So that, okay, I'm going to stop there and stop my monologue.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for this very insightful discussion, and I think that you have found some common grounds to work together with Astrid, maybe in the future of the climate budget of Oslo. And I'd like maybe to ask a last question because we're coming to the end of this session to Jouairyatou. The Association Bilan Carbone was born in France and is mostly working to develop methodologies for the purpose of organizations based in the French context. But you're also working, as you've shown us, in European environments through cooperations and European projects. How can our partners and attenders from Europe and beyond reach you and get inspiration from your methodologies, and maybe get how can you share your knowledge about carbon accounting to other actors outside France and Europe?
Yes. Firstly, there are several tools existing to do to calculate your carbon footprint. You have some standards like the ISO. You have also the GHG protocol. With the Bilan Carbone, the advantage is that you could have the result regarding the standards, but the main thing to keep in mind is that you have the French emission factors in the tool. So when we were involved on the project with the other European countries, each country has built its own database. For Croatia has built its own, the same for Greece, for Hungary, and for Italy. So you can use the tool with the French emission factors, or you can include your own emission factors to be able to have more accurate data regarding your local context. So it's a good question because we start working in 2020 on a common methodology to build an emission factor database called Bilan Carbone at international level. So it could be at regional or at national level. But the aim is to impulse local governments or some coordinator for a project to bring and to be able to design kind of governance to implement this kind of database in this country. But now we have, I think you can follow ABC on our social media, because we have some in June, in maybe 2 or 3 weeks, we will publish a short synthesis of these notes, and we will have a webinar on the beginning of July to present the methodology and how it could be implemented in different countries. And after that, I think we will have all the information to understand the design of a tool, the design of a database to be able to do your own carbon footprint, or maybe to spread the culture of the carbon footprint in your city, on your national, or in your country.
As you said, this is almost about like sharing a universal culture of accounting and tracking emissions with accuracy. As Thomas says, there is a matter of credibility behind that, so that cities can really have the transparency that Oslo is trying to have, to show these are our targets, this is where we are, but we are making the most to merge and integrate and mainstream the climate targets into our daily objectives and local policies. So I hope that you've all enjoyed this session, and I'm really happy with the conversations we've had and the presentations. I would like to thank you a lot, Thomas, Astrid, Jouairyatou, for your contribution. And I hope that we can follow up in the future about this this dialogue, these initiatives. We will send you a short email, maybe to share the presentations and maybe the emails as well, if you want to get in touch. I mean, that's also the purpose, coordination and cooperation throughout Europe under this EU Green Week and even beyond, because climate change is a worldwide issue that needs to be treated through this type of cooperation. Thank you very much to all of you who've attended the session, and see you soon for maybe next webinars under the EU Green Week, and even later.
See you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.